of a little different direction. Juneteenth has long been a holiday that's been almost exclusively celebrated by Black people in America for over 100 years. But now we are experiencing their collectives that are coming together to see that this is a holiday that is observed by everyone. Even recently, there has been a collective called, it's actually called Hella Creative. And it's an organization that has been formed to get companies to buy into making Juneteenth a paid holiday, making it a recognized holiday. And even with that, there's so much beyond just making it a holiday. There's so much that I feel like we need to even understand about it. Celebrations of Juneteenth began in 1866, 1 year after that fateful day when Major General Gordon Granger, he stepped foot down in Galveston, Texas, and he told Black people there who were enslaved that they were actually officially free. So ever since then, there's been this celebration. In fact, my family, most of them are from Louisiana, and Texas is a bordering state, and I have family there too, and it's really a big deal there in Texas. But beyond all of this push to make it a holiday, I think the more important thing is to realize is that a holiday, a recognition of a holiday, is not what we want and not what we need. This celebration has been going on for such a long time, but in all actuality, I'm really wondering what's there to celebrate when we're still treated second-class citizens. Recently, the California legislature, I believe, assembly passed a bill for reparations. The same thing has been going on for a very long time. And so the point that I'm making is, more than a holiday, a paid holiday, more than a nationally recognized holiday, we want some power to be relinquished. I think sometimes in situations like this, when you have national spotlights, we're forced to give up, just a little leeway, a peace offering. But a holiday won't cut it. Just in recent several weeks, there have been so many lynchings. 5 Black people have been found hanging from trees in the past weeks. T.T. Gully, Dominique Alexander, Robert Fuller, 24 years old. This was in Palmdale, California. An unidentified Black man was also found hanging in Manhattan Park on June 9th. So as we even begin to think about Juneteenth, that fateful day when they were told that they were free, I just want us to move past words. Let's have some action. Let's have some policy. Let's have some laws to back this up. That's what I'm hoping for this Juneteenth, this celebration. Black man was fired from Taco Bell because he had Black Lives Matter on his mask. I'm sure you all have heard about some of the things that have been going on at Starbucks and some of these other corporations. And I've come to find out that sometimes silence speaks the loudest. And Julius Van Hook won't let his speak for him. We must regroup on actions that we're going to take next, because words are not enough. People are listening. People are watching. People are expecting. I'm grateful for these dialogues. And these dialogues are meaningful and very much so important. But even more than our dialogue, we must organize so that we can determine what we're going to do next. To put some positive action to all of the words and the rhetoric that we share. beyond words, let's get an even distribution of power. So on this eve of Juneteenth, let's move past words and walk the walk, not just talk the talk. Thank you for this opportunity, Reverend McGarvey.
Hey, Julius, can you give us an update on the young man who was arraigned in Richmond?
Yes, absolutely.
Who's fighting some of the police brutality there?
Yes, absolutely. To bring it home a little bit more, in my work as the Director of Spiritual Care and Interfaith Juvenile Chaplain at Contra Costa County Probation Department, and I work with the Interfaith Council with our social justice and advocacy, there's quite a bit that's even going on in our own back and front yards that many of us may not be aware of. A young man by the name of Dejan Brown was apprehended unjustly by the Richmond Police Department. And yesterday, there was a scheduled court appearance, and he is suing the city of Richmond, the police department, as well as those officers individually. And I'm so glad that he's standing up to do that. It was actually caught on record, it was recorded, and it made national networks like TMZ, like the likes of TMZ, World Star Hip Hop, things of that nature. And I've been actually able to share with people that are oblivious that it hasn't stopped. And I think that's the thrust that I've been making with what I've had to say about Juneteenth. It's not anything new. It's just actually due to technology and being able to be recorded, where the masses are able to, or have no choice but to take the blinders off to what's been happening. So I'm going to be sending out more information of how we can support Dejan, Mr. Brown, and his family. I'll also add that in my work, I've had a conversation with a young man, and I applauded Mr. Brown for standing up, because the young man who I was seeing, who's there detained in juvenile detention facility, and he had some things going on with him with the Antioch Police Department, where he was being beat and having drugs placed on him and being threatened and his phone taken. And I'm telling you about this because, unlike Mr. Brown, this young man was too scared to speak up. When I spoke with his parents were scared to speak up. It takes courage. I believe he only shared it with me because he saw someone who looked like him, who he presumed had a voice and had some power. So I'm sharing this to let you know that we all have a part to play in this war that we're waged. And I thank you all for joining in this conversation. And if there's ever anything that I can do or highlight, I want everyone listening and watching to know that I'm here. I'm doing my best as a beacon in this community to help support our young people, especially those who are incarcerated and detained in our juvenile detention facilities. Thank you.
Wow, thank you. Appreciate your ongoing ministry. You've been with us for a year and a half, and I just want to celebrate that. And we knew going in a year and a half ago that you had big shoes to fill, but we really appreciate your important ministry here in the county, working with folks that have been in and out of the system, and especially making sure that we're helping them see a future for their own life. So Reverend Dr. Dale Weatherspoon from Easter Hill United Methodist Church is going to go next.
Thank you, Reverend Will, for the invitation to participate in this webinar, if you will, and thank you, Reverend Van Hook, for getting us started. Juneteenth is also known as Emancipation Day. It's also known as Freedom Day or Second Independence Day, also known as Jubilee. It is the oldest national commemoration of the ending of slavery here in the United States. The story goes that Major General Gordon Granger along with 2,000 Union troops, rode into Galveston Bay, Texas on June 19, 1865, to tell the enslaved black people that they were free. 2.5 years after the signing of the Emancipation Proclamation on January 1st, 1863, news arrived in Texas. Why did the news take so long to get to Texas, where there were 250,000 black people still kept in bondage? Some say a messenger was murdered on his way. Some say that it was because Texas was so far away, so far west, away from the most remote slave states. And so think about that. Let's say news traveled from Charleston, South Carolina to Galveston, Texas, 1,105 miles away. If a horse traveled 24 miles a day, it would take 46 days to reach Galveston, Texas, a month and a half. If a horse traveled 14 miles a day, it takes 78 days, 2.5 months to reach Texas. So why did it take 2.5 years to get the news to the slaves in Texas? Some say the slave owners wanted to reap one last cotton harvest. Well, 2.5 years is more than one cotton harvest. Clearly economics played a part in maintaining slavery in Texas. What began as a cultural event also became a political and social event. It became a political event as the newly freed slaves received instruction on voting. Now, I grew up in San Francisco, and I don't remember my parents saying anything or teaching me about Juneteenth. And it was not taught in the schools in the 60s and the 70s. In my 20s, I became aware of the Juneteenth celebration in San Francisco. San Francisco had or still has one of the largest Juneteenth celebrations outside of Texas, and definitely one of the largest in California. In 1950 or 1951, Dr. Wesley Johnson Jr., a Texas native and owner of the Texas Playhouse on Fillmore Street in San Francisco, is credited with inviting the Bay Area's African-American community to celebrate Juneteenth. This was the time of the second Great Migration from the South during World War II, and a revival of the Juneteenth celebrations across America. Dr. Johnson and a young Willie Brown Jr., also a Texas native, later to become the mayor of San Francisco and the Speaker of California's Assembly, rode on white horses, wearing Stetson cowboy hats in that first Juneteenth parade in San Francisco. The celebration stretched about 7 blocks along Fillmore Street, a thriving black community in the 1950s and 60s. Juneteenth celebrations have included parades with floats, car clubs, and black cowboys. Food, lots and lots of food. Barbecue and fish and sweet potato pie. And of course, music, gospel music, R&B, hip hop, and dancing. There were booths providing African-American vendors with an opportunity to market their businesses, such as selling clothing and showcasing their arts and crafts. There are booths registering voters and encouraging community activism and partnerships, providing information on healthy living and promoting empowerment through education. During the celebrations, you saw family, friends, and neighbors, and people from around the Bay Area coming together. The celebrations used to last 3 or 4 days, and then they became weekend celebrations, and now many are just one day, but the celebrations are still filled with peace and joy and fun and harmony. And there are other celebrations in the Bay Area in cities such as Oakland and Richmond, Berkeley, Vallejo, Antioch, San Jose, and even Santa Rosa. My church, Easter Hill United Methodist Church in Richmond, was involved in the Richmond Juneteenth parade for a few years, entering a float of Black pride and creativity. In 1980, Texas was the first state to officially recognize Juneteenth, followed by Florida 11 years later in 1991. New Hampshire in 2019 and Montana in 2017 were the last states to officially recognize Juneteenth. California officially recognized Juneteenth in 2003. Today, there are 3 states that still do not recognize or observe Juneteenth: North and South Dakota and Hawaii. The National Juneteenth Observance Foundation, located in Mississippi, continues to work for Juneteenth to be recognized as a national holiday. Today, Black people are still enslaved. The murders of Black men and women by law enforcement remind us that we are not free. Our movements are watched. We have to continually stay woke, be alert, and on guard each and every day. The prison industrial complex is slavery, warehousing, controlling, and slowly snuffing out the life of Black men and women. The Mississippi State Penitentiary, known as Parchman's Farm, is a maximum security prison located in the unincorporated Sunflower County, Mississippi. Parchman still has chain gangs and horrible, degrading, unsanitary living conditions. These men are treated as less than human. They are not free. Laws to suppress the vote and acts of violence threatening those who want to vote keeps Black people and people of color from exercising their right to participate in the democratic process. Like slaves, our voices seek to be silenced. The Emancipation Proclamation, signed in 1863, proclaims Black people are free. That news hasn't arrived to some white America in 2020. There are people who still see Black people and people of color as property, as less than white folks, as less than human. The truth is, we are all God's children, created in God's image. Each of us is of sacred worth and endowed with gifts to bring heaven here on earth. Juneteenth is a time to celebrate Black culture, pride, and history, to celebrate our freedom and the gains that we have made, the many, many, many great contributions we have made to the building of America. Yet Juneteenth is also a time to remind ourselves we have much work still to do, to remind white America that Black lives still matter. So we have work to do. More than protesting, more than holding signs, we must take action. We must take action through our vote, through standing up, even if it means risking or alienating family members in the name of justice. We must take action to defeat structural racism. Let's not just hold to individual conversations, but along with those individual conversations and building relationships, may we work to dismantle racism, America's original sin, structural racism, systemic racism. Let us work together. Thank you.
Wow, thank you, Dr. Dale. Preach it, brother. Wow. Next, we're going to hear from Sister Rabia Keeble, who's with the Qalbu Maryam Women's Mosque in Oakland. Sister Rabia was active when we were doing our Love Your Muslim Neighbor events and actually spoke on multiple panels with us around our county, and we appreciate you being a part of our event today, too.
Okay, thank you. Can you hear me? You can hear me? Oh, great.
Yes, we can. Thank you.
Okay, so I'm so appreciative of being here today, and it's good to see everybody. It's hot here, but I'll get started because Juneteenth is an important discussion topic. But I want to start at the very beginning here, because what features most broadly for me is the Emancipation Proclamation and what led up to that Emancipation Proclamation and the person who authored it. Okay, so in 1858, Abraham Lincoln and Senator Stephen Douglas had one of many debates, approximately 7, around the idea of slavery. So the issue of slavery was on everybody's mind at this time, as far back as 1858, if not before. Because if you remember, we have the northern states, we have the southern states, we have slave-owning states, and we have states that are not slave-owning. But most importantly, at this time, we have new territories that are being considered to be brought into the Union. And the issue was, shall they be slave-owning states or not? So this is what all the debating was actually about. It's like, shall we allow this nation to become a slave, identified as America, the slave-owning country, or shall we confine slavery just to those states that already practice it and sort of isolate it there and not let it spread anywhere else? Okay, so now that we know what they were arguing about and debating about, let's find out a little bit more about Abraham Lincoln, the great emancipator, or so-called. So one of the things that Stephen Douglas did, and they were very good debaters in those times, he kept calling Lincoln an abolitionist. And probably some of us would probably think he was as well, because, well, he did write the Emancipation Proclamation. Well, Lincoln was not an abolitionist. He said he was not. And he was more inclined in his personal thoughts, and even stated in his speeches, to send Black people back to Africa. Of the many solutions that he came up with, which he stated in some of his speeches, was that Black people should go back to Africa voluntarily, of course, if they want to, but also to create a colony of Black people. He was a separatist. He did not believe that Black people and white people were equal. He did not believe that Black people should be allowed to vote. He did not believe that Black people and white people were intellectually the same. And it's stated as such in his speeches. He convened a group of African men who I guess were freemen, you might call them at that time, to discuss this issue of sending Black people or them voluntarily going back to Africa. And it was put down because nobody felt like it was a good idea. Well, it probably wouldn't have worked out at any rate, because by this time, Africans were thoroughly, I would call it having a slave mentality and not yet ready for repatriation to Africa. So that failed. So none of these things happened, okay? So we have Lincoln, the separatist, the segregationist. He really was a segregationist. He was a racist, but who wasn't? And this is what we have to remember. We have these grand monuments to these people. Even the ones that are not being taken down presently, they were problematic as well, because none of them championed the idea of absolute equality between Black people and white people on every level. Okay, so moving ahead, Lincoln was elected to the presidency in 1861. In 1860, Black people, actually in the state of Texas, Black people comprised perhaps 30% of the population. And it's important to note, not all of them were slaves, okay? In 1861, Texas was a brand new state. Now, mind you, this is just a year after Lincoln has become president. Texas wasn't even a state when Lincoln became president. So in 1861, Texas, a brand new state, turned around, joined the Confederate States in seceding from the Union. And I find that like a dizzying statistic. Like they weren't even yet a state for very long, and they were like, okay, well, we're out because we're joining these other guys. So that's a little strange in my opinion. Not only that, but Governor Samuel Houston, who we all know about because of movies and so forth, they got rid of him. They kicked him out because he did not want to secede from the Union. I guess he wanted to remain a state in good standing, and he was actually deposed. He was kicked out. So we move forward to 1863. Lincoln signs the Emancipation Proclamation. 2.5 years later, in Texas on June 19th, and some other people have already spoken about what happened with Major General Gordon Granger, that he reads to the people there, to which people we don't know, but he read to some people that you are now free, and you can leave the plantations and you can do as you like. Well, the problem with all of that is, and the problem with all of the slaves on all of the plantations and slaveholding states was, if you have been a slave, where do you go? Freedom has a whole different meaning. Emancipation has an entirely different meaning to people who have nowhere to go. They don't have money. They don't have relatives who have houses they can go to, because everybody Black is a slave, except for those few that weren't. So I ask you to look closely at this issue of emancipation, because I believe that the issue that we're dealing with this very day between Black people and white people actually occurred at that moment when they said, okay, you're free, but nobody made any accommodation for what happens next. What happens next? Okay, so you have all these poor Black people who may not own anything, may not even own a wagon, and they're stunned. They're thinking, well, where do I go? What do I do? And a lot of them stayed on the plantations because that's where they had a home. That's where they had food. That's where they felt safe. Sure, some left, but many stayed. That became the sharecropping situation much later on. So instead of segueing into a whole lecture on the Civil War area and the antebellum South, I wanted to add some personal notes in here. I'm clearly African American, was not born and raised in California. I was born and raised in the Midwest. My family was part of the Great Migration out of the South into Chicago and other northern cities. I'll be quite honest with you, when I first heard about Juneteenth, I was like, what is that? Never heard of it before. It meant nothing to me personally, meant nothing to my extended family, because I think it was a very isolated thing. Okay, it was loosely celebrated, but I think not until, I think it was 1980, Al Edwards, who was a state legislator, it was turned into a state holiday in Texas. And I think just over time, it became something that we could celebrate jointly, all Black people. But certainly, it was not anything at any time in my lifetime where it was celebrated. We didn't talk about it. And that's something important to understand, that as white people and other allies began to embrace this idea of Juneteenth, you have to understand it's regional, and it's very something that did not spread across the United States among Black people. Does this holiday have merit? I believe this holiday has a great deal of merit, not necessarily because Black people were not actually emancipated, but because it is ours. It's because we can choose to have this holiday, and we can infuse meaning into it. We don't have to accept what somebody else is calling it or what it means. It is our holiday. And frankly, I think the idea, and I read quite a few things across the internet about Juneteenth, because like I said, I'm backing into it. I didn't really know anything about it, never celebrated it. I think it's really important that this day is gaining some understanding among our allies, and that they're beginning to understand, because it opens the door to looking at history. I can't tell you how many times on social media I've brought up things in history that are well documented and substantiated that my white allies, my brown allies, and red allies never heard anything about. How is this? Our history books are failing us. The most important things to Black people in this country are being left out of history books. And so if these things are being left out of the general educational system, how are people to understand why we say Black Lives Matters now? They won't understand it. So many people go, oh, I didn't know that, or I never heard of that, or these are parts of this nation's history. And as much as it affects all of us. So as we examine where Black people have come from to where we are now, on the one hand, you want to say we've come a long way and things have changed a lot. I will say this, the homework was never actually done. We had laws written, but the hearts and minds of white people never changed, because they don't understand, just as Lincoln didn't understand before writing the Emancipation Proclamation, which is another piece of paper, that there's a lot of hard work that has to go on the ground before you can so-called emancipate people who have had everything taken from them. Their autonomy was taken from them. Their languages were taken from them. Their culture was taken from them. How do you emancipate people like this? So today, if we talked about something like this, bringing people into a whole other culture, we'd have classes, we'd have all sorts of things to help them acclimate. Black people didn't have a minute to acclimate to this country, and white people didn't have a minute to acclimate to our new status. And the only thing they could do was push back. And we're still feeling the pushback today. It's like, I don't know who you are. I don't accept you as 100% human. I don't understand anything about you. So therefore, I don't want you next door. I don't want you walking down my street. I don't like the looks of your hair. I don't like the tone of your skin. And we still haven't reached those issues today. So have we come very far? I would say only on paper. We have only as much freedom as paper and laws and statutes allow us that were written specifically to protect our rights, while people were getting acclimated to us being around them and not being slaves. So we have a lot of work to do. I think all of us know what's been going on. Right here in Oakland, we've had nooses put up on Lake Merritt, to remind us of our place. That always has to happen. We have to be reminded of our place. There's always somebody that's available to do that. So we haven't come very far. We have rules, we have laws, but it takes so much to enforce them, doesn't it? Somebody practically has to call you the N-word at work in order to use, the laws to protect you from these sorts of things. So we need to keep the momentum going. We can't let up. If we let the momentum fall, then people will say, well, that was just a flash in the pan. They needed to get it out of their system. But I say, we cannot stop being in the streets. We cannot stop talking about this. We have to keep meeting. We have to keep addressing issues as they come, because they keep coming. And I think it's so important that everybody is seeing on television, social media, how the police victimize Black men and brown men. They see the videos and it can't be disputed. It can't be disputed. We're seeing it all in bloody color, just like we saw the Vietnam War in bloody color. We know it's real. So what do? Stay in the streets, keep talking about it. Allies, white allies, educate, educate. Go to the library, pick up some books on slavery, on Lincoln, on all these players, and from then on to the present through the civil rights movement, and understand that nobody really had the well-being of Black people in their minds when these things were written. They wanted to move an issue. They wanted us to shut up and get out of the spotlight. Okay, civil rights movement, okay, sign that thing, get that thing. But guess what? The lynchings continue. Everything that ever existed before continued. So where does the work lie? Black people, we always had the same job. We will keep the same job. White people, it's on your plate to fix this because you guys brought it, you fix it. That's how I see it. Thank you, Pastor McGarvey, for inviting me, and thank you everyone for listening.
Thank you, Sister Rabia, and thanks for reminding us that the work is not done yet. As Reverend Dr. William Barber says, we need a third reconstruction because the work of the first two were not done yet. And that's right, a lot of all people that are white need to do our own work, and we don't have to put Black people on the spot to do the work for us. And we're going to provide some opportunities to do that more in the future. We want to welcome Brother Sundiata al-Rashid from the Lighthouse Mosque in Oakland, who is going to be next. And please unmute yourself and lead on, brother.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Wassalatu wassalam ala ashraf wa anbiya'i wa mursaleen nabiyina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa ashabihi ajma'in. Thank you guys for providing this space, and thank you guys for inviting me. So my family is from Texas, West Texas. My dad was born in a town called Big Spring, Texas. Most people have never heard of it. But it's the biggest spring in that part of West Texas. And my grandmother, my dad's mom, was named Ida Mae White, and her birthday was actually Juneteenth. She took that day when it was time to actually fill out her birth certificate and everything. They asked her what day that she wanted for her birthday, and she picked June 19th in commemoration of this very southwestern Black holiday. A lot of Black people migrated, as the brother earlier said, to California from Texas and Arkansas, Louisiana, Oklahoma, where Juneteenth was a big deal. And so me coming up, you know, I remember the Black Cowboys, I remember the parades in San Francisco. It wasn't until I was older and I started to study African history that I realized the connection between Blacks in Africa, African tribes, the Hausa, the Yoruba, the Fulani, which was all tribes that curated horses and rode horses in the battle, and the Black Cowboys. That legacy came from Africa through those slave ships, and that's why they had the Black Cavalrymen, the Buffalo Soldiers, the Black Cowboys. It was a source of pride amongst Black people, and that was an important part of the Juneteenth celebrations in San Francisco, was those Black Cowboys and those, you know, riding down with the hats and the suits and on those horses. And it was a sense of pride for Black Americans. And it was more specifically a West Coast, Southwestern type holiday. I don't know if it was like if Blacks in New York knew about Juneteenth or Blacks in Philadelphia, but it was definitely something that we used to do and I grew up with. and it was even attached to my family. Like I said, my grandmother, that was the day she chose for her birthday. You know what I'm saying? And you know, she was a strong Black woman, and she was an Eastern Star. You know, and she was amazing. The things that she knew about life, and I feel like that story of that Black excellence is what we kind of lost, and that's why people can diminish Blacks to their lives not really mattering. And so I think that if we want to reclaim the regalness of Blackness, we have to start looking at those type of Black people who pulled themselves up from slavery. You know, my grandfather, he was born in slavery. My grandmother was born shortly after slavery. And they, you know, she died in 1984. And, you know, when she died, she owned a store and a cleaners, and she was a business person. One of the things that's been a hallmark of Black reality as a people is that every 3 generations, we had these migrations. And it's hard to really establish things and be permanent because they keep us on the move as a people. So, you know, it happened with the, you know, Great Migration, and then there was another migration after World War II, and then gentrification. Just when, you know, when I grew up, Berkeley was a Black suburb of Oakland, literally, but it ain't no more. You know what I'm saying? It's like, you know, people just keep getting forced out. Now people out in like Antioch and Stockton, people who the Bay Area was their home. So those are the types of things that I see that we could kind of try to remedy. We can try to make sure that that the African Americans have a permanent place in America. And it's not just this thing of, you know, subsidized housing, can't afford the rents, gotta move to a cheaper place over and over and over and over and over. And I think that should be the story of Black America in the future, is, you know, trying to actually settle and not have to move when their grandkids, you know, the parents is one place, and then by the time they got grandkids, everybody's someplace else, and it's starting all over. And the last thing I'll say about Juneteenth is that the one thing about Juneteenth, when I was a kid and seeing the festival, especially San Francisco, like San Francisco, their Juneteenth was remarkable. It really, really was. And right on. And just to see how that's diminished over time, you know, that fact of reality that community in the Fillmore district and Lakeview, some people call it Ocean View, and GT Towers and all of that, all of those things are gone. And then you go to East Oakland and West Oakland, and the same things are happening there now. Those are the things that we have to push back against. Like, it's easy to talk about, you know, the white ring far right Republicans, but I mean, really, it's you know, it's our Democrat brothers and sisters who run these cities, and they don't really put in nothing in place to protect Black communities. And then once the Black communities is gone, then everybody wants to kind of say, oh, let's make Juneteenth a holiday, like the brother said in the beginning. Like, we really got to make sure that these Black communities are whole and strong and vibrant and are with us, so that we don't have to drive around with our kids and be like, man, I remember when that was, you know, Dick's Texas Diner or something like that. And that's all I really want to say. I didn't want to talk too much. You know, there's a great documentary, because, you know, Lincoln is one of my most favorite people in American history. And I would just say about Abraham Lincoln is where he started out with and where he ended up with are two vastly different things. And, you know, when he fought to get a constitutional amendment to ban slavery, Frederick Douglass said that God put him in a position, meaning Abraham Lincoln, to do only what he could do. And it's because he had these mixed views on race that when he made that turn, a lot of Americans actually accepted it. If he would have started out on the far, you know, if he would have been a abolitionist, they'd have been like, that's just some abolitionist stuff. But to see somebody, you know, who's complicated, but in the end, he kind of came around and he was killed for it. So I just say that. No offense to Sister Rabia. Everybody got their own points. But Abraham Lincoln and John Brown, them is my two favorite white men in American history. And I don't even have a third favorite. I'm working on it though. Maybe Bernie Sanders.
Thank you, Brother Sundiata. Glad that you're here. Thanks so much. Next, we're going to have Dr. Erica Bains from St. Mary's College, a Sikh member of our Interfaith Council, and she'll be sharing some solidarity with us as well.
Hello, everyone.
Hello.
Sikh greeting is Vaheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Vaheguru Ji Ki Fateh. Whatever he does, it's his will, and at the end, everything is his. I have studied Juneteenth from a very different eye, actually one with a little bit of envy. When I heard that it was the oldest known celebration of freedom from slavery, and the fact that there were Union soldiers that had actually marched to Texas to tell people that they were free, and then I heard about the jubilation, and I heard about people just packing up and excited that they were free and they were leaving, kind of reminded me, kind of made me feel really sad. My ancestors were just about to become slaves and indentured laborers in 1879 till 1916. They went to Fiji. Some were killed on the way, mostly men. Women were the only ones left. So if some of our colors look a little different, it's because who knows how the women had to survive? Well, we all know. The thing is, to me, when I was growing up, learning about that, I thought that day never came for us. We lived in a country, and they were not white people. White people brought us there, but other people that lived there, and we all know the color of people that live in Fiji, never accepted us as equals ever. We had no right to own a property. We didn't have rights to go to the type of schools we had. We're always second in line for everything. So to me, it was such an amazing thing that happened in American history until my son was in grade 4 in the city of Orinda. And then one day his sister was pulled aside when she was walking with a brother and told not to walk with the N kid. Went on and on and on. He was going to JC. He was pulled over by the Contra Costa police, asked where he was coming from, whose car he was driving, told that he was not who he said he was. My son is a very dark kid. Then I started to realize what I was always envious of. People did not really have that freedom I thought they had. Yes, on paper, I thought. But in my mind, even as some of my ancestors had come to the US in the 1912s and 1913s, building the railroads in Oregon, they were being pulled by their turbans on the street, their necks being, chopped sometimes, not given food for days. And both people of all colors were involved in some of the abuse. When I look at this Juneteenth, I always feel amazingly excited for people of color, especially blacks, who had that one day of celebration. It was amazing. I thought President Lincoln had the courage to sign that Emancipation Proclamation. I always thought it was sad. It took 2.5 years for the news to get to people who really needed to hear that. And I always wondered, why did it take a civil war, and that for almost 5 years, for this to have happened? But then I always thought, what kind of jubilation must people have felt? Because we have never had that. We had to move out of the country, go somewhere else to find freedom. So I think it has to be celebrated. It has to be celebrated from the perspective that there are many people who have never had that jubilation. People that have never had the freedom. People have had to move out, to go somewhere else to find that. So yes, there is, I think, reason to celebrate. There are even slaves today, slave wives. If you are a person of a Sidri community in Syria, you are a slave wife, 12 years, 13 years, 14 years to men. So yes, that was a day that needs to be celebrated, because at least that day came. But in 2020, still I don't see, especially since what I've experienced firsthand from my own son's experiences, there isn't a lot of rights. Yes, they got this on paper, but there's still in some rights that are missing. So I'm not going to dwell on anything. I think the history has been told, and I have studied it with excitement, with sadness when I saw many things. George Floyd for one, Rodney, thing for another. I mean, I've seen, heard. It's just really sad. So there's no need to keep going after that. But I think that something needs to change. And from my perspective, being a Sikh, Sikhs were the first to be killed, arrested after 9/11. Still till this day, we get killed and arrested because of 9/11. As well and educated as Sikh men are, they can sometimes till this day get on planes. So I know as a class of people who have been abused for a long time that it is sad. But I think there is a will in people. And I think in the name of God, we can all take this great giant leap. There's bias in each one of us. There's prejudice everywhere. You talk to anyone, they will mention someone's name that's wrong. And I think if we can just stop our own biases, our own prejudice, and we start treating everyone, us, people, we have to look in the mirror and start everyone with respect, honor, and care. I think we can become part of that little change. We should remember 1865 because it is important, but then we must move on to get to the next step. I don't have a lot of my own perspective because I'm a great student of my own guru's teaching. So I will give you the teaching of my fifth Guruji in 1600, who said, each one of us, as a society, must accept that we are humans, and inherent in the human nature, we all make mistakes. But it is our responsibility to stop those prejudices, those biases, and take this giant leap of faith. Change your ways. You are the only one who can change you. Each human being needs to do this. And Guru Arjan says, this is how we achieve. Ask God to help you get on this track. Then for one step you take, He will take 1,000 for you. Unfortunately, for making that statement and telling people that there's prejudice and bias and everybody needs to change, he was boiled alive in public. But that was 1600. Yeah, I will tell you what my 10th Guru has said, and then I'll end. And this is very interesting. He says, I have no faith in a man, even if he prays 10 times a day and can treat other humans, other God's children with equality and justice. And he said, change these ways. in this life, this is a very temporary life, he said. It's a short vacation from your true home. You have little time left. Change your ways. I think we all, each one of us, white, black, brown, all of us, we are full of prejudice. Unfortunately, colored people and African-American Black people have suffered the most. And I think each one of us need to stand up for them as well, stand up for a much needed just and equal society. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Erica. Thanks so much for everyone being here. That's all of our presenters tonight that could make it. There have been some other things come up for some of the other presenters. So why don't we have a conversation? And because I can't see everyone at the same time, I think we're on 2 screens with 74 participants. If you want to raise your hand or unmute yourself, we'll try to call on you as soon as we can. Or you can put in the chat room if you have something to share. But Brother Willie Mims is here, and he is with the NAACP in Pittsburg. And we've been at protest together and love to catch up. We caught up this evening before our meeting tonight. So Willie, why don't you share something?
Okay,
Let me see if I can find you, put a spotlight on you.
Well, first of all, I want to thank all the presenters for the information that they presented, and secondly, I have some basic issues with Abraham Lincoln, and the story that was really not told about who he was. There was an amendment to the Constitution, to the 13th. Is there anybody who does not know what the 13th Amendment is? That is the amendment that freed the enslaved African people. There was an original amendment prior to that. It's called the Corwin Amendment, C-O-R-W-I-N. That amendment was going to be a compromise between the North and the South to maintain the system of slavery so that the South would not succeed. Lincoln, if that amendment had been ratified, Lincoln was supposed to sign that amendment. And so he was not interested in freeing black folks. He was interested in maintaining the status of the Union. But the South fired on Fort Sumter. And so that's setting stage the Civil War. But that is the original 13th Amendment that was not ratified. And like I said, if the South had not fired on Fort Sumter, then the black people would probably be still in slavery today, because Lincoln was supposed to sign it. The other thing about the emancipation, so I want to make, first of all, I am not a historian. I'm a retired educator. I am, however, a student of history. Students never stop learning. They're always learning. Okay? So Lincoln, first of all, the longest celebration of black people here in this country is not Juneteenth. It's called the D.C. Emancipation Act of April 16, 1862. That is when, first of all, the Washington, D.C. had the largest number of enslaved African people in this whole nation. And for the United States, this so-called republic and so-called freedom, it made them look bad. And so there was a senator by the name of Sumter, I think his name is Sumter. He pushed for the United States government for Congress to free all of these enslaved Africans. There were approximately 3,200 of them. And that act was signed by Lincoln. It was not his. It was not his Emancipation Act, but he just signed it. And it was signed on April 16, 1862. That day is celebrated every day in Washington, D.C. It is considered as a national holiday. Now, for those of you who pay taxes, you can remember one time the tax day came on April 16th, but you didn't have to pay anything on April 16th. You have to pay it either the next day. So April 16th is a national holiday in Washington, D.C. So that's the oldest holiday that's been celebrated in this country by black people. And all black people should celebrate that day, but the majority of us do not know about that day. The other thing that happened with Abraham Lincoln, and he went along with it, when the war was over with, and the enslaved Africans were free. No, I'm sorry. As a result of this act, the D.C. Emancipation Act, Abraham Lincoln and his people, they gave each holder of enslaved African people $300 for each person they held in slavery. And they gave the enslaved African person $100 if they left the country. So if you didn't leave the country, you got nothing. Okay, so I want to make sure that we clearly understand that Lincoln and what they did was really not any friend of ours in the first place. Lincoln also, in terms of our participation in the Civil War, our folks fought in over 440 battles. And only because of our participation in that Civil War that the North won. The North had not won one major battle prior to the black soldiers coming into that battle themselves. So we actually saved the Union and freed ourselves. So nobody freed us, we freed ourselves. So I'm skipping all over the place, because I know I got them time. So the other thing I want to say is that we have the 3/5 clause in the Constitution, and it's considered, well, people won't want to say, well, that's talking about property. Well, that property is a human being. Those were the enslaved, that's how they counted the enslaved African people, as 3/5. Now I don't know, everybody here should have heard about the famous Dred Scott decision. 1857, Dred Scott was an enslaved African man. He and his owner had freed him, but they wanted to test his citizenship in the courts. So he took it all the way to the Supreme Court, and there was a racist judge by the name of Kearney who ruled on his case. And he said that Dred Scott was considered as 3/5 of a human being. They had no rights that a white man was bound to respect. And so so that decision that he made was based upon what was in the Constitution. He was a former slave owner himself, but he was using the Constitution to justify that decision. And so when you see, so I always tell folks that we are operating under the shadow of Dred Scott. Because when they don't see our humanity, they can shoot us down in cold blood. They can roll up on a playground and see a child with a toy gun and then jump out of the car and start firing away. They can shoot hands up Michael Brown. They can put their knee on a man's neck and choke him to death. So this shadow, this Dred Scott shadow that's hanging over us, our humanity is not being seen. That is the problem that we as black people are being confronted with today. And no one wants to admit that. But anyway, I'm just going off on thinking another. I want to say one more thing, and then I'll turn it over to somebody else. Let me see. Core Emancipation Act. You know, when they, okay, there was only one time that democracy ever existed in this country, period. You know, we have a word and a title called democracy, but the only time that democracy ever existed was in a place called Durham. I'm not sure if it's Durham, South Carolina, Durham, North Carolina, wherever Durham is. That was about 1896, something like that. That was a community of both white and black folks living side by side, basically, and they got along. They were sheriffs. They had both black and white forces. And so it was a community that respected each other. But the remnants of the Ku Klux Klan saw this thriving community of both black and white. They they organized forces and took over a city. That's the only city in the history of this country that has been overthrown. Only elected government that has been overthrown at all, and nobody did anything about it. But anyway, I don't want to get off of my student history, but out there.
Thank you, Willie. And
can I say one more thing?
Sure.
Okay, so for those of you who are on this panel here, and for those of you who are listening, I would encourage you to not to use the word slave. To use the word slave is a form of dehumanization. You cannot see a slave, but you can see a human being. You can see a boy or a girl with chains around their necks. You can see them being beat or raped in a field. You can see a man and a woman working in the field out there. You can see them being dragged out of the jungles of Africa and put on them ships and stacked like sardines back to the bottom of it. So the word slave it has allowed people to put up a shield from the inhumanity that was done on our people. So I would encourage you to not to use slaves. They didn't bring slaves out of Africa. They brought human beings. They brought prisoners of war. Please try to stop using it. I know it's been ingrained into our psyche for hundreds of years. So just, that's my plea for all of you who are on this panel. And I hope that you hear me. Thank you.
Thank you, Willie. Good reminders that our language matters. And people first, language is always the most honoring. So people who were enslaved and the human beings that were taken, up to 40% of whom were Muslim, and brought here and forced into a slaveholder religion and a slaveholder version of Christianity. I think I see Gloria Sunshine. Are you there? Did you want to say something?
Well, I guess I am totally ashamed at my ignorance of, first of all, Juneteenth, and second of all, the history as these speakers have expressed according to Lincoln and the Emancipation Proclamation. But I was so moved at another piece I had never heard about, which I guess is June 21st in Tulsa. So I was tuning in expecting that there would be a lot of discussion also about Tulsa. Is that worth any mention, or would anybody say anything as relative to that?
Well, you have more than Tulsa now. You have Tulsa, you have Rosewood, you have Durham, you have Wilmington. All of those were teeming Black communities who were thriving after no more than 30 or 40 years after the Civil War. I mean, they were communities. Let me go back to Tulsa. Tulsa, for example, in Tulsa, around 1 year, money that was generated within that community only left either 2 or 3 times in 1 year. So the Black community, the money circulated and recirculated within that own community. Those Black folks who occupied Tulsa did not need any help, did not need any assistance from anybody. They had everything. In Durham, in Rosewood, in Wilmington, Colfax, where they lynched 154 Black men. So we're talking about thriving Black communities. And Tulsa was called the Black Wall Street. And all I say is that if they would have left us alone, we would not be in the financial condition that we are in today. We would have been like the Wall Street that we have here, because Black people were very creative. First of all, they did all the work for all those years. So nobody had to show them how to build anything or create anything. But anyway, I hope I guess you.
That's right. And the gentrification is a conscious decision of white people not to invest in neighborhoods when Black people are living there, in order to try to take them over. So even disinvestment is a part of this strategy and even integration took away access for a lot of African American people of very good schools that they were in with their own Black teachers, and African Americans were excelling in their educational lives, and
That is the truth.
integration was done to help white people learn to see black people as equals, and we're still not there.
Well, one more
And
thing.
so,
One more thing. Will, and I tell the-
Brother Willie, we've got a few other people that want to share some stuff on Tulsa and a few other things here too. And I
Oh,
think
okay, good.
Rabia, and then Dale, and then Arlene. Rabia?
Yeah, sorry. It's a lot of clicking. And I wanted to actually say to Gloria if she can hear me. Can you raise your hand if you hear me, Gloria? Thank you. I want to be clear about what your question was, because what I thought I heard was, why isn't Tulsa celebrated the way we are talking about Juneteenth? Was that your question?
You're muted. Unmute yourself, Gloria.
I can't.
Am I unmuted? Okay.
Yes.
Last Sunday on CBS Sunday Morning, which is a wonderful program, I don't know if anybody watches, from 7 to 8:30, Tulsa and the massacre at Tulsa in 1921 was the subject, and it was shocking. I mean, totally, I'm sorry again for my ignorance, but I would think that this would be something that you would be just so upset. I mean, so outraged. But I know there's so many other outrages too.
Okay, so I just want to quickly say, we are outraged. Our grandparents and great-grandparents were outraged about Tulsa, Rosewood, and many others, okay? But there is very little anyone could do about it at the time. I think you remember in that special, maybe it was a 60-minute special that I saw on Tulsa, that they talked about what their parents had done mainly, and that was to keep quiet. Black people had a habit in those days, for their own safety, of keeping quiet about these massacres and lynchings, because you never knew if somebody might say something that would bring retribution down on your head. So in those times, it was important to keep quiet. We don't have those times quite the same way now. So we can talk about it now, and we can ask you guys, our allies who are white and red and brown, to also understand that history was kept from you of this nation that's important, just like so much Native American history was kept from you. Latino, Hispanic American history was kept from you. So that's why when I was talking initially, I said, it's gonna be up to you guys to get the education you so badly need about what really went on in this nation and why we are where we are right here today, okay? So Gloria, thank you for that question. And I'm so glad you watched that special, but find out about the East St. Louis riots, find out about Rosewood, find out about, there's so many things that once you embark on this journey, I think you're gonna have to hold on to something, because it's gonna be quite an eye-opener for you.
That's the truth.
Yes, even the fact that Abraham Lincoln, who we often lift up as a hero, thought of the Emancipation Proclamation as the last resort because he couldn't keep the Union together. So I think Arlene Sirat, are you there, Arlene?
Well.
Oh, Dale. Dale, go ahead, Dale, and then Arlene, and then Sundiata.
Let me also add to what Gloria was asking. This may sound like a ramble, but hopefully you understand this all ties together. Rosewood. First of all, Black people are very intelligent people. They have had their own businesses. If you do the study, which they don't teach you in school, do the study of all the inventions Black folks in America have contributed to our daily living. Many of the things that you use in your household today, electricity and so on, were invented by Black folks. So they called Tulsa Black Wall Street. Folks know how to run businesses. And so one of the things we can do today to help in the Black Lives Matter movement is to support Black businesses. San Francisco, the reason the Juneteenth parade celebration isn't as big as it used to be. San Francisco used to be about 12% African American. Now it's down to 6% because of gentrification. Redlining makes it hard for folks to buy homes. Some folks have said one of the worst things that happened in America for Black folks was the integration of schools, because once the schools were integrated, the schools no longer taught Black history. And so that's why we have so many folks that want to go to the Black colleges. They can learn about Black history. They learn who they were and who they've come from. And so there's a lot of things that they haven't taught white folks in school, like the Tulsa. It's like they hadn't taught the Black folks in the school. So we have to learn these things. We are upset about this. So when our number 45, the president wants to go to Tulsa on Juneteenth to make a speech, that's nothing more than dog whistle language to say, we want to continue to have this be white America, and we're going to squash the people of color. That's a signal. He is not, how I say it, he knows what he's doing. He's
right,
got
I
folks
believe
around
that.
him,
Yes.
okay? And so he's trying to say, we don't want people, Black folks, to rise up to be self-sufficient anymore. We don't want them to have their businesses. We want them to be dependent on us.
Thank you.
I will add one last thing too, in case I don't get a chance. The 13th Amendment. The 13th Amendment to abolish slavery had one caveat in it. For folks that were incarcerated, they can still be treated as enslaved people. That's why you have a lot of folks that are incarcerated that are working for Levi's, making jeans, might be making your airline reservations when you call as call centers. And they're getting paid pennies with no health care. Yes, they don't tell you that. They're working for major corporations.
Yes, the 13th Amendment did not end slavery. That's right. There's a great movie on Netflix called 13th that goes into the history of this and why after the Civil War, the increase in controlling Black bodies and brown lives was through our criminal justice system. Arlene Sarot, and then Sundiata, and then Sandy.
Hi, I'm Arlene Surratt, and I just wanted to thank you for this program and all the education that you're bringing to us, and help us to become better allies and continue the work. That's all I wanted to say. Thank you.
Thanks for being here. We appreciate it. We're all in this work together, and we have to sharpen our swords together. Sundiata.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that one of the things that back in the time before integration was the Black people had a strong Black press. Like they had different newspapers in different cities, like the Pittsburg Courier. And so people like Ida B. Wells, she was able to talk about the lynching, and that's what really was able to document things like Tulsa and all of those race riots. If it wasn't for the Black press, it would have been lost to history, right? But it was documented by the Black press. In today's day and time, there is no Black press. Like the Black press has been one of the fatalities of integration. So I think that one of the things we have to do is we have to reach out to Black individuals and Black organizations to document their stories so that 100 years from now, we'll really know what happened to George Floyd. We won't have to try to sift through this debris of, colorblind society that a lot of people are trying to produce. So we definitely need the only reason why we're able to know about, and like the brother said earlier, I think it was Dale, or maybe it was brother Willie, those race riots was common after World War I. When Black people came back from the war and they had a certain sense of pride, and they was like, we just got through standing up for rights, we should be getting some rights here. The way they dealt with it was all of these white mobs would go into Black places and they would burn down the places and destroy the businesses. Those was common things. Tulsa, Oklahoma was not like a runoff in American history. That was post World War I America. When they said race riot, it meant whites killing Blacks and burning down their houses. After World War II and Vietnam, when they said race riots, it meant Blacks, burning down and looting neighborhoods and communities. But the original term race riot was simply white people, you know, doing what white folks do.
That's messed up.
That is messed up.
Oh, you-
And Tulsa was like the first time that bombs were bombed on civilians.
Yeah.
White people got in their planes and were dropping actual bombs on the black neighborhood. That was
Oh, yeah.
that was the level of terror and violence that was going on in the United States. Now we've got to stop the police brutality because we've legalized so much of their systems of control.
That is right.
Sandy Goldberg has her hand up. Are you there, Sandy?
Yes, hi, I'm here. Thank you. So thank you for the program. This has been amazing and so eye-opening. I too feel so ignorant to so much of this history that was never taught to me. But as white people, I am trying to do my part, and we are having a Juneteenth education at the place where I work, and I'm kind of leading the charge, and I need some help because I created an educational piece that just talked about what Juneteenth was and what it meant, and I shared it with someone who's kind of an assistant to me in the practice, and she felt like she couldn't put it up. She couldn't put it out. And she said people will look at me differently and they'll say, oh, poor you. And they'll feel sorry for me. And I didn't want to do that to her. That wasn't my intention. I'm trying to educate people to know what Juneteenth is. So what would you say to that?
So that's one of the reasons why we are doing this program, so that we can hear from folks what Juneteenth means, because it's a mixed bag. It's a commemoration of an Emancipation Proclamation that was never fulfilled, and the 40 acres and a mule and so many other promises were never fulfilled. True equality was never fulfilled, partly because white America could not bring it into their own heart. They couldn't do their own work that quickly to start viewing others as equals, and we're still living with the consequences. So we're hoping that this this recording will be up on our Interfaith Council's YouTube. If you want to share other links with other folks, folks are only going to be able to learn and grow from where they are, and if they're not ready yet, give them some other baby steps. Do we have some other suggestions from our speakers and other folks that have that want to share with some possible ways to help our sisters and brothers open their eyes a little bit and do what little work they can? Maybe it's the president himself putting his rally on this day that's opened some people's eyes enough to at least Google it to see what Juneteenth is all about.
Well, I would say this, and we've heard these as sayings, but be the change you want to see. I said earlier that sometimes when we're standing up for truth, we're standing up for justice, means we have to take some risk, and that means we might lose some friends or some family along the way. In our scriptural tradition, it says the light always overcomes the darkness. And so be the light, bring the light into the world. And so the darkness is the ignorance, the darkness is the lack of knowledge, the darkness are the things that haven't been taught. And so we need to bring those things to light, because as we do, we begin to see one another's humanity. We begin to see not the other, not as the other or something to be feared, but we see the other's full humanity. We only fear what we don't know. We only fear what we don't know or who we don't know. So we got to work at building those relationships across cultures, across town, across barriers.
Diana put a link in to a Facebook link in the chat room that you can go to. You can also look at other history books that have tried to fill in where the history books that don't get approved by Texas or some of these large states that have a stranglehold on publishing textbooks for education. In order to keep these stories from being told, We have to find these revisionist histories. And if you have other Juneteenth events that you want to share, I invite you to put a copy in our chat room for everyone to see, and I'll post all of those that are good educational and Juneteenth on our Interfaith Council Facebook page. So you can go there to look for some other events. But I know that the United Church of Christ is doing one tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. Our local presbytery of the Presbyterian Church is doing one Sunday evening at 5 o'clock that Reverend Kamal Hassan is leading, and you can go to presbyteryofsf.org if you want to learn more about that vigil. And please share links in the chat room. Willie or others want to share?
Yeah, I just wanted to say that to Sandy, first of all, when you putting on anything like this, you really have to have an understanding about a simple understanding about what Juneteenth is. What's the purpose of Juneteenth? What happened? Why is it necessary? Why are Black people celebrating this day? The simple answer is the General Gordon Granger, when he sailed into Galveston, Texas on June 19th. And it was his announcement to all the enslaved Africans and also to the people who had them enslaved that slavery was over with, and that this country, and so this was his announcement to those people that the end of slavery was there. And according to the history books, that was the last place that held Black people in slavery. It was in Galveston, Texas, but that is not exactly historically accurate. The last battle of that Civil War took place at the Palmero Ranch in Texas, and that happened, I think, in July of that year. But the main one is the celebration of the June 19th, so everybody knows that day. So if you have that simple information in your head, that this is the day that this General Gordon Granger sailed into Galveston, Texas, and made the historic announcement to both the owner and the people who owned it that slavery was over.
And the last announcement, not the first announcement, the last announcement.
Right. The last, yes. Right.
Thanks. Other sharing. Other folks want to share? You can unmute yourself if you can. We're only going to go for a few more minutes, and then we're going to call it a night. But thank you so much, everyone, for participating and hanging in here for more than an hour and a half. JPH.
Yes, Javier Pruitt-Hill. Thank you, everybody, for hosting and for contributing. Born and raised San Francisco, about 3 generations in. I appreciate everyone who spoke. When talking about Juneteenth, it's a very important date in history. However, where are we going to move forward? How are we moving forward? What type of actionable items can we leave with today? The sister that spoke earlier, she talked about sending or white folks doing the work themselves as well. We look at the indoctrination of white supremacy in our classrooms. We've learned a lot about white history over the generations. What are some actionable items we can leave with so folks don't forget about the Tuskegee experiments? They don't forget about Tulsa. They don't forget about Rosewood. They don't forget about Juneteenth. So I would just like to see us as a group come up with some action items for all of us before we end the call.
Good point. What are some action items we'd like to see? Ways we can be people of faith living it out here in the world. You can unmute yourself. You can just say one thing that you're going to do on June 19th.
Well, I'll be participating in 3 Black Lives Matter marches tomorrow, and I'll be speaking for a short minute, for 5 minutes on one of them. I don't know what I can say in 5 minutes, but I'll do what I can to get as much information as possible. They don't want me to speak longer than that. You know, it's a kind of a large program, so everybody's limited. But I will try to enlighten them on Juneteenth. You know, one of the things I'll tell you that in terms of Juneteenth, the majority of the celebrations that Black folks have been doing, they consist of a lot of music, a lot of dancing, you know, poems and stuff like that. But very little history is done. So why have a historical event without a historical component to the event? It is insane. And so, you know, I'm going to give them what I can 5 minutes. But that's what I'm doing.
Dale?
I'll support
Gloria?
Yeah, I'll support Black business tomorrow.
How about a suggestion for those of us who don't know what might be the best thing to do tomorrow? Are there any suggestions from the Black community?
This is Pastor Dale. I'd say do some Black history, study on Black history. Google something about Black history so you become more familiar. Look up for some of the inventors. Spend money at a Black business. Those are 3 things that just come to mind right now.
So there's another thing that, you know, when you talk about reading, if you really want to know something about the history of this country, since 1619, the first 20 was supposed to be brought over here, 16 Black men and 4 Black women. There are 2 historical books. One is by John Hope Franklin, and that's From Slavery to Freedom. And that's one of the most authoritative history books on the history of Black people in this country since 1619. And the other one is by Lerone Bennett Jr. It's called Before the Mayflower. So either one of those books will give you a history of Black folks in this country from 1619 all the way to about 1970, something like that.
Thank you.
Okay.
But
go ahead.
What are you saying, Gloria?
Well, I'm just wondering, yes, I appreciate those books and I will look them up, but as far as anything going on specifically that we should join or we should look for, or
I think there's a gathering at 5 p.m. in Walnut Creek at Civic Park.
Okay.
And that's one that's close to you.
Right.
There's been some Juneteenth celebrations in Richmond, but with the COVID-19, it's Gerald wasn't organizing it this year. And there's a lot of online things that if you just look for Juneteenth celebrations online, you might be able to find near me, or you can find some national ones. I'm going to post a lot on our Facebook page, and so you can go there. And okay. There is the Juneteenth.com, which is like the national Juneteenth website that a lot of people post their Juneteenth events at. And then, of course, there's all sorts of anti-racism books on white fragility, from Ibram X Kendi on how to be anti-racist instead of just non-racist, that the real opposite of being racist is anti-racist, not non-racist. And there's some great reading. You can go on YouTube and look for Juneteenth history videos. There's lots of good ways to find information online. And Sundiata has his hand up. Let's let him share some ideas.
We're going to have a Juneteenth Unity Juma under the sun at the Berkeley Civic Center. There's going to be a rally against anti-Black racism and a Juma prayer. And it'll be several speakers. It'll be tomorrow at the Berkeley Civic Center at 1 p.m. And so we encourage anybody who's in the area or wants to come through, please come through. We're going we're trying to do our Juma services, the ones we are having, trying to start back. We're trying to do them outside in parks so that people can social distance. So we're asking people just to wear a mask and don't breathe on nobody. But if you know, if you can do that, come on out. We'll be there at 1 p.m. tomorrow. That's Berkeley Civic Center. And also Saturday at Masjid Waterspoon in East Oakland, we're doing a food distribution. And that's going to be 1,600 prepackaged food boxes that will be given out to the community. So anybody who wants to come through and grab 100 boxes or just 10 or 1 or 5 or however many you want, come on out. That'll be Saturday at 10 o'clock at Master Waterdean, and the address is 1700 47th Avenue. Don't go to 47th Street because that's going to be North Oakland. You want to go to 47th Avenue, and that's going to be East Oakland. And, you know, that's where a lot of need is. So those are 2 programs for Juneteenth that we're going to be trying to do. Both of them are in Alameda County, but we're inviting all of our Contra Costa brethren, you know what I'm saying? You know, Easter Hills is in effect.
And the food program is in our last e-blast. So if you got our last e-blast, the information on the food program is there. And the information on the Juma prayer tomorrow is on our Facebook page already.
Perfect.
I grabbed it off of Brother Hatem Bazian's Facebook page when I saw that.
Perfect.
Very quickly,
Yes.
are you talking to me, Will? Oh, great. Thank you. If anyone's interested, I tried to send everybody a message through the chat that, and I put the email address where you can reach me if you're interested in sitting and talking with somebody, because yeah, you can read a lot of books, you can go to the library, and you can exhaust yourself trying to stuff a lot of history of America into your brain, because in my opinion, my humble opinion, in order to understand America, you have to start with how the Europeans first started colonizing brown and black people all over the world. If you want to know more about Qalbu Maryam Women's Mosque, and we're transitioning out of mosque to social justice, please go to our website. Please talk to me. Get on our mailing list. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Will.
Thanks so much for being here. And I'm going to just recognize that we're at an hour and 45 minutes. We want to thank all of our speakers. And so if we can share some claps and maybe unmute ourselves and thank everyone that way. And on our gallery view, use our sparkling hands to thank all of our speakers for giving of their time and their lives and all of their historical history and expertise. We thank you so much, and we're grateful that you're here and that you've been a part of this. This will be up on our YouTube page later if you want to share it with people that weren't able to make it to this event. And all of the links are going to be on our Facebook page that you've put in the chat room. So thank you. So,
sorry, Will, what is your Facebook page?
Oh, if you go on Facebook and you search for Interfaith Council of Contra Costa County, we have a Facebook page, and we put a lot of information about our events like this one and other interfaith articles that we come across that teach people about how to love their Muslim neighbors and their Jewish neighbors and their Sikh neighbors, because we know anti-Semitism is a base theology of white nationalism too. And the more we look at all of the intersectionalities of these issues, the more we have to stand together against the hate.
Right.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Amen.
Will,
Thank
Will,
you.
Everybody, I enjoyed everybody.
Will,
Thank you.
Guys.
Thank you. Thank you, Dale.
okay, I just sent a YouTube link about privilege. It's very short, and it's one of the best things. Okay?
Okay.
Great.
Where is it?
Thank everybody for sharing.
It's in the chat.
It's in the chat.
I'm in the chat.
Along with a couple other articles.
No, I'm in the chat.
Leave it up.
Dale, is that the one from the United Methodist Church on discipleship? Racism is not a black problem. White silence is no longer a privilege.
That's one of the two articles I sent, and I also sent a YouTube video.
Okay. I'll make sure we get all of them up on our Facebook page.
Okay.
And yeah, oh, good stuff here.
I don't
Okay,
know.
thank you.
Not a good stuff.
Thanks again.
Thank you.
Very historic church you pastored.
And it looks like Rabbi Jill is mentioning that the Temple Isaiah is hosting a discussion based on Ibram Kendi's on how to be anti-racist tomorrow at 12:30. So go to Temple Isaiah if you want to find, or templeisaiah.org. Is that right, Rabbi Jill? Or is there a hyphen between Temple Isaiah?
Don't think so.
There is a, yes, there's a hyphen. I can try to put it up real quick for you.
Temple-isaiah.org.
Temple-isaiah.org, yeah.
Sorry, one of the YouTube videos started to play in my background.
Oh,
Thanks,
okay.
Rabbi Jill. Thanks, everybody. Thanks all the members of East County Shared Ministry I saw here. Good to see folks from Ileton and Rio Vista here on this call, as well as Pittsburg to Oakland. Appreciate everyone's presence.
Thanks for the invite.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Be well, have a good Juneteenth, and then share something you learned with someone.
Will do.
Yep. Be well.
Okay.
Thanks, siblings.
Bye.
Goodbye, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.